There's something strange about the moment you finally turn inward. It doesn't happen dramatically like in movies. It's quieter, almost disappointing at first. No thunder, no divine revelation. Just you, sitting there, realizing how little you actually know about yourself. It's unsettling, almost humiliating. You've lived your whole life inside your mind, yet you've barely scratched its surface. And the truth is, most of us spend years constructing versions of ourselves that make sense to others but leave us strangers to our own souls. You start to see it everywhere. The subtle ways you perform, the faces you wear for each situation. At work, you become competent and calm because that's what earns respect. With family, you soften, smile a little more, suppress your irritation because peace feels safer than honesty. With friends, you pretend to have it all figured out. It's like wearing layers of armor, each one forged from other people's expectations. You tell yourself you're adapting, but deep down, you know. You're hiding, and maybe you don't even know from what. The first time you try to peel it all back, it feels like dying, because those masks aren't just for show. They've become your identity. You've worn them for so long that you can't tell where the mask ends and where you begin. So, when you try to look at yourself honestly, it's like meeting a stranger. There's discomfort, even disgust. You realize how much of what you thought was you was really a collection of borrowed ideas, shaped by fear, duty, and the desire to belong. You start to notice your contradictions, how you preach honesty but hide behind silence, how you crave love but run from intimacy, how you want peace but keep walking into chaos. It's painful to admit, but the person you thought you were is an illusion. And the illusion served a purpose. It kept you functioning, kept you accepted, kept you safe. But it also kept you small. Sometimes you wish you could go back to not knowing, back to thinking life was simpler when you just had to play your role. But once you've seen even a glimpse of what lies beneath, you can't unsee it. There's something haunting about realizing that your own reflection has been lying to you for years. And yet, that same realization carries a strange kind of hope. Because if you've been living a false life, maybe there's still time to build a real one. You begin to see why Jung said that self-knowledge requires courage. It's not about knowing facts about yourself. It's about being willing to face what you don't want to see. It's about recognizing that the parts you've rejected, your anger, envy, fears, and insecurities, are not enemies. They're fragments of your truth, fragments you abandoned because they didn't fit the story you told yourself. And reclaiming them means tearing down the story altogether. The hardest part is realizing how much you've depended on others to define your worth. You thought self-discovery was about solitude, about detaching from people. But now you see it's not about isolation. It's about honesty. The kind that doesn't seek applause, the kind that doesn't dress up pain as wisdom or disguise confusion as calm. It's the kind that allows you to say, I don't know who I am yet, and still keep going. And as you sit with that truth, you begin to sense that knowing yourself isn't a destination. It's a descent, a gradual sinking into the depths you once avoided. You start to listen to the voices inside you. Not the ones that crave validation, but the quiet ones, the ones that whisper from beneath the noise. They speak of things you've ignored, your longing for freedom, your hidden resentment, your unspoken dreams. You begin to realize that your soul has been waiting, patiently, painfully, for you to come home. It's not a beautiful process. It's messy, uncomfortable, and often lonely. You lose parts of yourself, or rather, the parts that were never truly yours. The more you uncover, the less certain you feel. You start to understand why most people prefer distraction. It's easier to chase success, approval, or even love than to face the emptiness within. But if you can stay with it, the silence, the discomfort, the confusion, something begins to shift. One night, you sit in the stillness and feel something unfamiliar. It's not joy, not peace, not clarity. It's something deeper, a faint recognition. For a moment, the layers fall away, and you catch a glimpse of something raw and real beneath it all. You realize that beneath the performance, beneath the noise and the fear, there's someone quietly watching, someone who's been there all along. And maybe that's where it begins. Not with perfect understanding, but with a simple act of courage. To look, really look without turning away. To stop asking, who should I be? And instead whisper, who am I, when no one is watching? It's a small question, but it opens a vast door. One that leads not upward, but inward. Because the truth is, self-knowledge isn't about becoming something new. It's about remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. It's about realizing that the journey back to yourself is the only journey that ever mattered, and that every mask you shed, every illusion you release, brings you a little closer to home. There comes a point when you finally understand that the darkness you've been running from isn't some foreign invader. It's you. The anger, the envy, the shame, the hidden impulses you've tried to bury. They've been following you all along, waiting for acknowledgement. You've spent years pretending to be only light, convincing yourself that if you stay kind enough, patient enough, good enough, the darkness will disappear. But it doesn't. It lingers in the corners of your mind, shaping your choices, bleeding into your relationships, whispering things you don't want to hear. The first time you stop running and turn toward it, everything inside you rebels. You want to look away, deny it, justify it, anything but accept it, because admitting that there's cruelty, selfishness, or rage in you feels like betrayal. You were raised to believe those things make you bad, but the longer you stare into that darkness, the more you realize it's not evil. It's misunderstood. It's the part of you that never got to speak, that was silenced, shamed, or dismissed. The part that said no when you forced yourself to say yes. The part that cried out for freedom while you kept playing the role of the good person. You start to see that the shadow isn't your enemy. It's your truth, exiled. It holds the power you disowned, the passion you suppressed, the authenticity you traded for acceptance. And now, meeting it feels like standing face to face with your forgotten self. It's terrifying, not because it's monstrous, but because it's real. You begin to understand why Jung said that no one becomes enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. It's not easy. Sometimes the darkness fights back. Old wounds reopen. Memories you thought were gone surface in dreams, in conversations, in moments of quiet. You feel anger at things you've forgiven too quickly, grief for versions of yourself you never allowed to live. But in that pain, there's honesty. For the first time, you stop pretending. You stop saying, I'm fine. You stop trying to be good all the time. You let yourself be human, raw, contradictory, imperfect. And in that imperfection, something begins to heal. Slowly, you notice how your relationships change. You no longer demand perfection from others because you've stopped demanding it from yourself. You start to see their shadows too, not as threats, but as mirrors. You begin to understand that everyone is fighting the same silent war between who they show and who they are. Compassion deepens, not the sweet, fragile kind, but the fierce one. The kind that looks darkness in the eye and says, I know you. I've met you in myself. There's freedom in this kind of honesty. The more you accept your own darkness, the less it controls you. You stop projecting it onto others, stop blaming, stop pretending. The anger that once consumed you becomes fuel for courage. The envy turns into inspiration. Even pain transforms into understanding. What once seemed unbearable becomes a teacher, showing you what you still need to integrate. and you start to realize that your shadow is not a flaw to fix. It's a doorway. Behind it lies everything real about you. The laughter that used to be wild before it became polite. The curiosity that asked too many questions. The fire that wanted too much, felt too deeply, dreamed too big. You locked all that away because it didn't fit the image of who you were supposed to be. But now you're learning to unlock it, not to be reckless, but to be whole. Some nights when everything is still, you sit with the shadow. You don't fight it anymore. You listen. You let it speak. Sometimes it says, "You're afraid." Sometimes you're lonely. Sometimes you still don't believe you're enough. And instead of arguing, you say, "I know." It's a strange kind of peace, not the peace of light, but of balance. You start to see beauty in the tension, meaning in the mess. And somewhere along the way, something shifts. You realize that embracing your shadow doesn't make you darker. It makes you more human. It makes you real. You're no longer split between who you are and who you should be. You're both light and dark, both tender and fierce, both wounded and wise. You begin to love yourself not despite your flaws, but because of them. And that's when you understand. The goal was never perfection. It was integration. It was learning to carry both the sun and the storm within you and not crumble. It was realizing that your darkness isn't the opposite of your light. It's the soil that makes your light grow. All this time you were afraid that facing your shadow would destroy you. But the truth is, it's the only thing that can set you free. There's a moment when you realize how much of your life has been lived for other people. Not out of love, but out of fear. Fear of being judged, misunderstood, left out, or unloved. You can trace it back to childhood when you first learned that approval was a kind of currency. You did what was expected, smiled when you didn't want to, stayed quiet when you should have spoken, and every time you betrayed yourself a little, the world rewarded you with belonging. That's how it starts. The slow, subtle separation from your own truth. For a long time, you don't even question it. You think that's what growing up means. Learning to fit in, to be responsible, to meet expectations. You carry the weight of who you're supposed to be like an invisible backpack, filled with the shoulds and musts handed down by others. And for a while, it works. You build a life that looks right from the outside. People say you're doing well. You smile, nod, and play your part. But somewhere inside, something begins to ache, a quiet, persistent longing for a life that feels like yours. That longing is the beginning of awakening, but it doesn't come gently. It comes as restlessness, anxiety, maybe even a quiet depression. It's that gnawing sense that no matter what you achieve, something's missing. And the truth is, it's not something. It's you, the real you, buried beneath layers of expectations. Jung called this the struggle for individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, separate from the voices of the crowd. It's not about rebellion for the sake of rebellion. It's about freedom, the kind that comes from within. You start to notice how much of your identity was built on imitation. The way you speak, the things you chase, even the way you define success. Most of it isn't yours. You inherited it. And when you try to break away, the world resists. It calls you selfish, strange, ungrateful. But the truth is, society doesn't really want individuals. It wants roles. It wants predictability. It rewards those who follow the script and punishes those who deviate. So when you begin to walk your own path, you lose things. People drift away. The familiar comfort of belonging fades. It's lonely at first. You question yourself constantly. Am I making a mistake? Is this worth it? But beneath that doubt, something small and steady begins to grow. A sense of inner alignment. For the first time, your outer life begins to reflect your inner truth, even if no one else understands it. And that feeling, that fragile, trembling authenticity, is worth everything you've lost. You start to redefine what it means to be yourself. It's not loud or dramatic. It's quiet, grounded. It's choosing to say no when your whole body screams, enough. It's saying yes to things that nourish you, even if they don't make sense to others. It's realizing that you don't have to prove your worth by meeting expectations, that your existence itself is enough. There's power in this kind of independence, but it's not the kind that dominates. It's the kind that liberates. You no longer measure your value by comparison or applause. You stop seeking mirrors in other people's eyes. You begin to live from the inside out. And strangely, that's when you start connecting with others in a deeper way, because authenticity attracts authenticity. When you stop pretending, people around you either fall away or finally show you who they really are. And maybe that's the gift of this painful process: clarity. You start to see who truly loves you, not for who you've been pretending to be, but for who you are beneath it all. The relationships that remain become gentler, more real. Conversations shift from small talk to truth. The silence between words becomes enough. But there's also peace in solitude. You start to appreciate your own company, not as an escape, but as a return. You walk alone sometimes, but you're no longer lonely. You understand that solitude isn't the absence of love. It's the presence of self. It's the space where your thoughts can breathe and your heart can listen. You begin to see the world differently too. You realize that everyone is caught in this same struggle between authenticity and acceptance, individuality and conformity. And you stop judging. You stop trying to change people. You understand that each person has to wake up in their own time. Some days you still feel the pull, that temptation to go back, to make everyone comfortable again, to shrink yourself so you fit better. But then you remember what it felt like to live half asleep, and you know you can't return. You've outgrown the mask, so you keep walking, even when the path feels uncertain, because being yourself isn't a final destination. It's a daily practice, a quiet rebellion against everything that tries to make you forget who you are. And as you walk it, you start to sense a kind of freedom that doesn't depend on anyone's permission, a freedom that comes from finally belonging to yourself. You spend much of your life trying to be good. It sounds simple. Just do the right thing, be kind, help others, tell the truth. But at some point, you realize that being good isn't always good for you. You notice how often your goodness is tied to guilt or fear, how much of it comes from wanting to be liked or from trying to silence the voice that says, "You're not enough." You start to see that sometimes the person who looks the kindest is the one who's been bleeding quietly for years. Maybe it begins with something small, a moment when you say yes even though you want to say no, or when you forgive someone not because you've healed, but because you're afraid of losing them. It's subtle, the way you trade your truth for peace. You tell yourself it's compassion, maturity, selflessness. But slowly, the lines blur. You start to wonder if your kindness is just another disguise, a way to avoid conflict, to stay in control, to feel valuable. Jung was right. Being good can be its own kind of shadow, because what we call goodness often hides everything we're afraid to feel: anger, envy, pride, even love. Real goodness isn't about suppressing those parts, it's about integrating them. But that's messy. It's easier to act virtuous than to be honest, easier to smile than to admit resentment, easier to comfort others than to confront your own emptiness. There's a certain pride in being good. It gives you identity, purpose, even superiority. You think, at least I'm not like them, selfish, cruel, careless. But one day that illusion cracks. Maybe you snap at someone, maybe you lie, Maybe you realize you've been silently resenting the very people you've been helping, and it breaks you, not because you failed, but because you see that your goodness was never pure. It was conditional. It was armor. That's when the real work begins. You start to ask yourself, what if being good isn't about denial, but about truth? What if goodness isn't a performance, but a way of being that includes every part of you, even the parts that don't look good? You start to see that sometimes kindness means setting a boundary, that honesty can sound harsh, that love can come with anger. You realize that goodness without authenticity is just control in disguise. The people around you may not understand this change. They were comfortable with your compliance, your constant yes. They might call you selfish, cold, or difficult, but you're not becoming worse. You're becoming real. You're learning that compassion doesn't mean sacrificing yourself, that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting your worth. You're discovering that truth, even when it hurts, is kinder than false peace. Slowly, your understanding of morality shifts. It's no longer about appearing good. It's about being whole. You begin to accept that light cannot exist without shadow, that love, to be genuine, must include the parts of you capable of hate, that peace, to be lasting, must be born from conflict faced and understood. You stop chasing purity and start seeking integrity, and in that process, you rediscover your strength. The same fire you once tried to extinguish becomes the energy that keeps you alive. Your anger turns into clarity, your pain turns into empathy, your flaws stop being reasons for shame and become reminders of your humanity. You realize that true goodness is not in perfection, but in awareness, in the courage to face yourself completely and still choose to act with love. There's something profoundly humbling about that. You stop seeing yourself as the hero in everyone's story. You no longer need to save or fix people. You just show up honestly, flawed, open, human. Sometimes you disappoint others. Sometimes you disappoint yourself. But even that becomes okay, because you understand now that goodness isn't measured by approval, but by authenticity. One night, you sit alone and think about all the times you tried to be good instead of real. You remember how exhausting it was. All the pretending, all the smiling through pain, and then you exhale. For the first time, you feel a kind of peace that doesn't depend on being perfect. You're no longer chasing light. You're learning to live in it with all its shadows. And maybe that's what true goodness really is. Not the absence of darkness, but the courage to walk through it without losing your heart. To be honest, to be kind, to be whole, even when it costs you comfort. You stop trying to be the good person and start becoming a real one. And that somehow feels infinitely better. Fear has a way of shaping us without our consent. It starts early, the fear of being rejected, of failing, of not being enough. You learn to avoid pain the way a child avoids fire, instinctively and completely. You build your life around safety, safe choices, safe people, safe dreams. You call it being responsible, but deep down, you know it's something else. It's protection. From what exactly, you can't always say. Maybe from the unknown, maybe from yourself. At first, avoidance works. You keep your world small, predictable. You control what you can, but life has a way of catching up to you. The more you run, the more the fears multiply. They find new forms, new disguises. One day it's the fear of failure. The next, it's the fear of success. You realize that fear doesn't just live in dark corners. It lives in your habits, your choices, your silence. It's in the dreams you talk yourself out of, in the apologies you offer when you've done nothing wrong. There comes a time when you get tired of it, not because the fear disappears, but because you see how much of your life it has stolen. You start to notice the quiet moments when fear whispers, "Don't try, don't speak, don't change." And for the first time, you talk back. Maybe it's a small act of defiance, sending the message you've been afraid to send, saying the truth you've been swallowing, walking into something uncertain. It's terrifying. Your hands shake, your heart races, your mind screams that you're making a mistake. But afterward, when you survive it, there's a stillness, a fragile, exhilarating sense of freedom. That's when you begin to understand. Fear isn't meant to be conquered. It's meant to be understood. It's not the enemy. It's the messenger. It shows you where you're still chained, where your wounds still bleed, where your faith in yourself still falters. When you stop running and start listening, fear becomes something else, a guide, even a teacher. It reveals the edges of your comfort, the boundaries of your courage. And when you cross those edges, you expand. It's not a heroic process. Some days, you'll still retreat. You'll still feel small. You'll still believe the lies fear tells you, that you're not ready, that you're not capable, that the world will fall apart if you step out of line. But the difference now is that you see through the illusion, at least a little. You know that fear is not the truth. It's a shadow cast by what you haven't yet faced. You start to see fear everywhere, in other people's anger, in their need to control, in their judgment. You realize that much of what we call cruelty or apathy is just fear wearing armor. And suddenly, compassion grows, for yourself, for others. Because beneath the fear, there's always the same thing, the longing to be free. Sometimes, late at night, you can feel fear rise in your chest like a wave, the kind that used to drown you, but instead of fighting it, you let it move through you. You breathe. You say, "I see you." And slowly, it passes. You notice that it doesn't destroy you anymore. It's just energy, heavy, yes, but transient. You start to realize that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the willingness to feel it fully and still move forward. And that's how you begin to change your relationship with life itself. You stop waiting for confidence to act. You act, and confidence follows. You stop waiting to not be afraid. You walk with fear beside you. You carry it like a companion, unwelcome but honest. And in that companionship, something inside you grows stronger, quieter. You stop needing guarantees. You stop needing everything to make sense. Eventually, you notice something beautiful. The same energy that once fueled your fear now fuels your growth. The trembling that once paralyzed you becomes a sign that you're alive, that you're expanding. Every time you face a fear and survive it, you reclaim a piece of yourself that was lost to caution. You start to trust life again, not because it's safe, but because you've learned that you can handle it, whatever comes. And that trust changes everything. You don't stop being afraid. You stop being ruled by it. You see fear now for what it really is. Not a wall, but a doorway. Behind it lies everything real: love, joy, meaning, truth. Fear still knocks, sometimes loudly, but instead of locking the door, you open it, step through, and remind yourself that freedom was never the absence of fear. It was the courage to face it. Change used to terrify you. You thought of it as something that happened to you, a disruption, a loss of control, a kind of death. And in a way, it is. Every change is a small death of a version of you that once felt safe, certain, familiar. You fight it like everyone does. You try to hold on to what you know, to keep things steady, to protect what you've built. But no matter how tightly you cling, life keeps moving. People leave. Feelings fade. You outgrow things you once prayed for. And eventually, you realize resisting change doesn't stop the loss. It just makes the letting go more painful. Jung said that the soul is never static. It's always evolving, always transforming, whether you're ready or not. At first, that sounds cruel. Why can't things just stay the same? But then you notice something. Every change, no matter how painful, carries within it a kind of intelligence. The heartbreak that shattered you made room for depth. The failure that humiliated you taught you humility. The endings you begged to avoid opened the door to beginnings you couldn't have imagined. Change, you realize, isn't your enemy, it's your teacher. Still, it doesn't come easy. Sometimes it arrives quietly. A subtle restlessness, a whisper that says, "You've outgrown this." Other times it comes like a storm, ripping through your life, tearing away everything familiar. You don't get to choose the form it takes, only how you respond. And in that choice, in that trembling acceptance, you begin to see the purpose of it all. You start to notice how every ending carries a mirror. It forces you to confront what you've avoided. When a relationship ends, you face your patterns. When a dream collapses, you question your motives. When you lose something precious, you realize how much you took for granted. Change humbles you. It strips away your illusions. It shows you what truly matters and what was never real to begin with. But it also creates space, the kind that feels unbearable at first. Emptiness used to scare you. You'd rush to fill it with work, people, distractions, anything to avoid the silence. But now you begin to see that emptiness is sacred. It's not a void, it's a womb. It's where new life begins to form quietly, unseen. It's where your next self begins to take shape. There's a moment after enough change when you stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start whispering, "What is this trying to show me?" That shift, that tiny, honest surrender, changes everything. You realize that growth isn't something you force, it's something you allow. You begin to flow with life instead of against it. And when you do, you see how change connects you to something larger. Jung called it individuation, but it feels like evolution, not just personal, but collective. You see it everywhere, in nature, in people, in history. Everything is becoming, even when it looks like it's breaking. The caterpillar dissolves before it becomes a butterfly. The seed cracks before it sprouts. Why should your transformation be any less dramatic? You begin to sense that every change, even the painful ones, is a part of a greater unfolding. Life is not punishing you. It's sculpting you. It's stripping away everything that's false, everything that can't come with you to the next stage. And though it hurts, you start to trust the process, because each time you've been broken, something new has emerged, softer, wiser, truer. Eventually, you stop fearing impermanence. You begin to see its beauty. You understand that nothing is meant to stay, not even you, as you are now. Every breath, every season, every love, every loss, it's all movement. And in that movement, you find meaning. You stop chasing stability and start seeking balance, the kind that bends but doesn't break. There's peace in that, a quiet, grounded peace that comes from knowing you can survive change, because you are change. You are not the same person you were a year ago or even yesterday. You're a collection of endings and beginnings, of falling apart and coming back together. And the more you surrender to that rhythm, the more alive you feel. One day you'll look back and see the pattern, how every fall led to a rise, how every loss carried a hidden gift. You'll see that change was never chaos. It was choreography, life's way of leading you back to yourself. And you'll realize that you were never meant to stay the same. You were meant to evolve again and again until every version of you finally learns how to let go and trust the becoming. There are moments when the real battle isn't with the world, but with yourself. Not a dramatic war with clear sides, but a quiet, relentless tension between what you show and what you feel, between who you are and who you think you should be. You wake up every morning and wear your composure like armor. Smile, function, say all the right things. But underneath, there's a storm. You feel split, torn between the part of you that craves peace and the part that demands truth, between the part that wants to fit in and the part that wants to break free. It's exhausting living like that. You tell yourself you just need to try harder, be more patient, more disciplined, more grateful. But the more you suppress, the louder it gets. That quiet rebellion from within, the guilt, the sadness, the anger, the longing, all the things you've pushed into the shadows start leaking out in unexpected ways, in the way you overreact to something small, in the emptiness you feel after achieving something big, in the way you withdraw even when surrounded by people. Jung called it the conflict of opposites, the war between the conscious and the unconscious. But it doesn't feel philosophical when you're in it. It feels like drowning in your own contradictions. There's a strange comfort in realizing that this conflict is not a flaw, but a necessity. It means something inside you is waking up. You start to understand that peace isn't the absence of struggle. It's what happens when you stop running from it. The conflict becomes a conversation, a dialogue between the parts of you that have never been allowed to speak. One side says, be safe. The other says, be real. And maybe, for the first time, you start to listen to both. It's not easy. Facing yourself never is. You uncover old wounds, memories you thought you'd outgrown, beliefs you didn't realize you still carried. Sometimes the pain feels too big, like your chest can't contain it. But then you realize, this is the work. This is what it means to heal. Not to erase the conflict, but to integrate it. To let light and shadow exist side by side. To stop choosing one over the other and start holding both with compassion. You begin to see how every inner struggle mirrors something in the world around you. The fights you have with others are often the same ones you've been having within. You get angry at people for being controlling when you're terrified of your own lack of control. You judge others for being selfish when you've buried your own needs for too long. Slowly, painfully, you start to see that the world is your reflection. And in that reflection, you find both the wound and the way through it. There's a moment, maybe fleeting, when everything goes quiet. You're no longer trying to fix yourself. You're just there, sitting with it all, the contradictions, the confusion, the ache. And instead of feeling broken, you feel whole. Not perfect, not peaceful in the conventional sense, but real. You realize that your wholeness was never about eliminating conflict. It was about embracing it fully. As this understanding deepens, something in you softens. You forgive yourself for not knowing, for failing, for surviving the only way you knew how. You stop demanding that life makes sense. You start allowing it to be what it is. Unpredictable, imperfect, alive. You see that the same darkness that once frightened you now gives your light its depth. You begin to trust that both belong, and then slowly the tension inside you transforms. It doesn't vanish, but it stops feeling like a war. It becomes movement, like the tide pulling in and out, a rhythm you can live with. The opposites within you begin to dance instead of fight. You find that peace is not stillness, it's balance. It's the ability to stand in the center of your own contradictions and not collapse. One day, you look at your reflection, not the polished version you show the world, but the raw one, the one with shadows under the eyes, with fear and tenderness in equal measure. And you realize, this is you. Not the image, not the ideal, but the truth. The person who has walked through their own chaos and come out softer, not harder. The one who understands now that life isn't about silencing the conflict inside, but about listening to it until it becomes harmony. And in that moment, brief, fragile, but real, you feel something that might just be freedom. Not the loud kind, not the triumphant kind, the quiet kind that comes when you stop fighting yourself and start belonging to your own soul. At some point, you stop blaming the world and realize that the real war has always been inside you, not the kind that can be won with strength or strategy, but the kind that must be surrendered to before it can be understood. You used to think your pain came from others, from their judgments, expectations, betrayals, and yes, they left marks, but the deeper wound was self-inflicted, the constant battle between who you are and who the world told you to be. You begin to see how much energy you've spent trying to hold everything together, trying to meet standards that were never yours, to play roles that never fit. You wake up tired, not from lack of rest, but from the weight of pretending. The truth is, it's not the outside world that exhausts you most. It's the internal resistance, the quiet rebellion of the soul that refuses to keep living in contradiction. So you start to withdraw, not out of bitterness, but out of necessity. You need silence more than conversation, solitude more than company. The people around you may not understand. They might think you've become distant, cold, detached. But what you're really doing is listening to the voice within that's been drowned out for years. It's faint at first, almost imperceptible. But the more you listen, the clearer it becomes. And what it says isn't always comforting. It asks hard questions. Why are you so afraid of being alone? Why do you keep seeking approval from those who don't see you? What would your life look like if you stopped trying to impress anyone? The answers are never simple, but they're honest. And with each one, you strip away another layer of illusion. You begin to understand that freedom isn't something the world grants you. It's something you reclaim by no longer betraying yourself. There's pain in this process, a kind of mourning. You grieve the old self, the one who lived for others, who tried so hard to belong. You grieve the dreams that were never truly yours. But in the quiet aftermath of that grief, something new begins to stir. Not happiness, not yet. Something deeper, peace. A peace that comes from no longer needing to prove anything, from realizing that solitude isn't punishment but purification. You start to walk differently through the world. You speak less, but with more truth. You stop explaining yourself to people who only hear what confirms their own fears. You begin to see that every external battle, every argument, every disappointment, every injustice mirrors something within you. And when you start working on that inner battlefield, the outer world loses its power to wound you in the same way. The more you accept your inner contradictions, the less you feel the need to fix the outer ones. You stop demanding that life be fair or people be kind. You understand now that the world is both cruel and beautiful, violent and tender, just like you. And maybe the point was never to conquer one side, but to learn to live with both. There are moments in this newfound solitude when loneliness still creeps in. You feel the old ache, the longing to be seen, to be understood. But even that starts to change. You realize that being unseen by others is no tragedy when you've finally started to see yourself. That being misunderstood by the world means little once you've learned to listen to your own heart. And gradually, you stop fighting. You stop needing to win. The inner war quiets, not because everything is resolved, but because you've made peace with the mystery. You see now that the tension between the inner and outer worlds is not a curse, but a path, a bridge between who you were and who you're becoming. You start to live with a softer strength. You can stand alone without feeling abandoned. You can forgive without forgetting. You can love without losing yourself. And for the first time, you don't feel the need to escape the world or yourself. You can stay, you can breathe, you can be. And in that stillness, something extraordinary happens. You feel whole, not in the way that suggests perfection, but in the way that means you finally accept all of it. The contradictions, the chaos, the calm. You understand that the real journey was never about escaping the world or conquering the darkness. It was about returning to yourself, to the part of you that has always been there beneath the noise, quietly waiting for you to come home.